Good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Hare. I am very grateful for you joining me today for our Module Mastery webinar. And my mission over the next 30 minutes or so is to make you a module master. Now, some of you may know what modules are, some of you may not. Don't worry, everything will be explained. But I would like to point out up front, this is advanced functionality within eShop. So we will be geeking out a little bit. We will be looking at things. Don't worry, there'll be a bit of detail in the presentation today. We will send you some follow-up help articles. We will send you a recording of this webinar as well, so you've got all the materials to hopefully use these features after today's session. In the session itself, I'm going to look at a few things. Firstly, I'm going to give you an overview of the modules feature within eShop itself, just to explain what it is and what it does. And then we'll look at a couple of use cases. We'll look at using modules for a content library, and then we'll look at using modules as an element library. And don't worry too much about those titles at this stage. All will become clear later on. And then just for fun, what we'll do towards the end of the session is we'll build a couple. We'll actually kind of look at it from the administration perspective in terms of how you would deploy web modules in your eShop account. And indeed, as long as I don't go on about anything and go off on a tangent, then we'll have some time for Q&A. So let's get things started. What on earth is a module? Well, very simply, it's just a section of content that you can add to the Smart Editor. So modules are a feature of the Smart Editor, and they allow you to take whole sections of content and put them into the Smart Editor. They are, well, we know because we've got the analytics, one of the less used features of the platform, but I think there's real power in them, which is why I wanted to give everyone an overview of what they do and indeed the functionality behind them. So what you're probably used to, if we look at the Smart Editor here on the right-hand side, we have the structures, which is where you build the layout of the email. We then have the blocks, which is probably what you're most used to doing in terms of dragging in image blocks, text blocks, button blocks, spaces, etc., etc. But then last but not least in that list, we have the modules, okay? And the subtle but important difference between a block and a module is a block is just a placeholder for a single piece of content, whereas a module can be a whole set of content. You can build quite sophisticated modules, and indeed you can save them and update them in your module library. So think of them like a set of template elements. You probably already have eShop email templates, but we also have the ability to template very small sections of the emails. And as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen there are some examples of modules that I've created for today's webinar, which we'll look at. So the pink block, the turquoise, green, and the big help out blocks, they are all examples of modules where I've created a section of an email and I've saved it to my module library. And in doing so, I would then be able to use it in any future email. Now, when we look at the use cases, as I said, I'm going to look at two particular use cases today. We'll first look at using modules as a content library. And what I mean by a content library, articles or adverts that you regularly use in campaigns. So the real value in modules is in things that you find that you're putting in emails over and over again. Now, sometimes that means kind of building a library of modules that you can then draw upon for particular features. And if you are using automation, then that's a really good shout, because then you can not just create the automated campaigns that go out the door, but you can use modules to have a degree of control over the content that is then inside those emails in the automations. So let's have a look at what I mean by a content library using modules. If we look on the screen here, we've got what I would call a pretty standard article: headline, image, body copy, and link. The Postman API introduction, along with an image and a short introduction to the content. Okay, so that's a very common format that you will put a story or an article into your email. And I dare say what a lot of you do is you then clone those stripes and then basically fill in the next one. And what you can do is, if you think, well, this is an article I'm going to reuse, this is something I'm going to promote in lots of emails, or I'm going to use time and again, you can save it to your module library. And along the right hand side there, you'll see there's some I prepared earlier. All I have to do is drag the module into the design, and it creates all the elements: the headline, the image, the body copy, and the link straight away. So we can build a library of these things. We can also, look at them in different ways. There's two different views: the thumbnail view and the preview view. We can also tag them. So, if you have a very large number of articles that you want to store, then obviously tagging and categorization help you to keep things organized. And again, we just drag it in. We can, have, hundreds of articles potentially within our library. You might have, let's say, if you are doing, well, the use case that we have here is we have lots of help articles, and as much as we might have other kind of news stories, trying to get you to come to customer webinars and things like that, we quite often throw, best practice guides, help articles, etc., into the footer of emails just to enrich the content. So those are the sorts of things that we can just have ready and waiting in a modules library for whenever we need them. Just to zoom in, as you can see there, the controls, when you go to that third tab in the Smart Editor, the modules tab, we have the search function there where you see I've kind of filtered the results to the help article tag, and then there's those two views of it with both the list view and the thumbnail view between those two buttons there. So those are the controls that we have available to us as far as looking through our library of modules. We'll look at how we actually build them and categorize them and store them a little bit later on in the session. Now, tagging and categorizing modules is a good shout, because, I say, what you can find if you get hooked on this feature is you then end up with lots and lots of modules, and then it can become a bit of a needle in the proverbial, searching for things. So it's a good shout to use the tagging, to use the categorization to keep your module library organized. And certainly, if you have an eShot account where there's lots of users sharing your sub account, then again, you've got potentially multiple people using the modules system, and therefore, it's a shared space and can get busy. The search and browse options are very simple to use, and as I say, just to clarify, this is limited to a sub account level. So there's no sharing of modules across the whole account. It is sub account specific. If you do want to share modules across different sub accounts, the way you would do that is to add them to a template. You can save an email template to be shared across multiple sub accounts, and then you can save the modules into different sub accounts. What I tend to recommend, though, when we look at modules from the perspective of a content library, is go for what I call evergreen content. Things that are useful to you repeatedly, the sorts of articles that you will want to put in emails time and again. As I mentioned, for us, a use case is having a library of help articles. Topical content, when it is a kind of news story and it's about what's happening today, that's going to have a limited shelf life ordinarily. So therefore, you might want to consider, when you are creating a content library of articles, well, what is the content that's going to stand the test of time? What's the evergreen content? Topical content, that's probably more the sort of thing that you would use in the Smart Editor in the conventional sense. So what else can we do with modules? There's some the other thing with modules that I really like is we can bring some efficiency to the process of creating emails. Now, as you see there, I've taken an existing module, and there's a couple of typos in it, so I can just correct those, and then indeed, if I wanted to, I can change any element I like in an existing module. So just because it's been templated and it's stored in your library modules doesn't mean you can't change it. Once you drag the module into the editor, you can make any changes you like to it, just the same as you would any other aspect of your design normally. But that becomes really useful when we then talk about synchronized modules. So there is a setting within the modules feature where you can keep content in a module up to date wherever it is used in designs. Okay, that might be a difficult thing to explain just by a statement on the page. So let me show you. Here I have an eShop feature update article. Okay, so same format as what we've already been looking at, whereby we have headline, body copy, image, and link. Okay, and I've dropped this into a design here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure it is synchronized. Changes made to this module will be applied to all templates and email messages where this module has been used. Okay, I then go to another email design, and I head back to my modules library and I drop that same article in. What I now do is I change some of the text. So I want to make amendments to that email, but I'm also amending the article at the same time. Now, what then happens when I update and save the module is it not only changes it in this design, but it changes it anywhere else that that module is used. That only works when the synchronization is turned on. So you see now, if I return to the original email that I was looking at, where the sync is on, that content has changed. The text at the bottom of the email, the text section of that article has changed. So obviously, when we talk about evergreen content, things aren't going to change. The links to the pages on your website might not change. The fundamental principles and certainly the design of it might not change. But if there are minor updates to the content over time, and if you need to change a couple of words or just try a different style of promoting something, then it is possible to make changes to those modules and then sync that across all your designs. One very important point I must highlight, though, when you're using the synchronization feature, you do need to go into the design and let it update. Okay, so it won't just, if it's already attached to a campaign that is about to send, the eShop effectively stores a copy of the design to send. It doesn't let amendments happen to that on the fly, which is why you see the in use button when you look through your designs when it's associated with a campaign. So when you are using synchronized modules, you do still need to go back into the design and resave it. So who's been paying attention? I love a bit of audience participation with these things. However, I'm not using the Zoom polls thing today because every time I use it, it seems to go horribly wrong. But if you want to use the Q&A, what else did you notice between the two designs that I looked at there? Same article, two different emails. What was different? Let's see who's paying attention. Anyone got any ideas? I'll give you a clue. It was something visual, or a couple of things visual for that matter. Anybody? Can you show them again? Yeah, I can do. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll show them alongside each other. Here is on the left. We had the one that I started looking at, and then when I went into the other email design and changed the text, then the one on the right is the one that I edited, and hopefully a little bit more obvious to you now. You may notice that there are some differences in the styling. Yes, the button. So well, it's not just the button, it's the font as well, in both the headline and the body text. And this is because modules will adhere to the settings for each email. Okay, so if you are using different styles or brands, it doesn't, you don't necessarily have to create completely different sets of modules to show the same content. Or indeed, if you update your email design and have an existing module library, eShop will adhere to the styling that's set in the template. So although, a button is defined in the module that is synchronized, and when you pull it in, it creates the button. What eShop will also do is it will then read the template settings for that email design, and it will adhere to the styling of that that email design. And that's just a way in which we ensure consistency, because obviously modules really are more about the content than the design. We can equally, there are some elements that we can use from a design perspective, which we'll look at a bit later. But certainly when you're using synchronized modules or indeed unsynchronized modules, just be mindful that you can set styling, you can make things look how you see fit in the module, you can save it to your module library. If you then use that module in a different style email, eShot will make an attempt at updating that module to adhere to that email design. And we got a question there from Alison, which is, can you override that? The simple answer is yes, you can, Alison. You can change it back, but when you bring the module in, it will affect it. You'll need to manually change it. So as we saw earlier on, once you add a module to your email design, you have complete control over it. So you can change anything you like once it's in your email design, the same way you do, when you are editing any other email. So ordinarily, obviously, modules, you would expect a degree of consistency between your different emails, and certainly from a kind of a brand perspective, we wouldn't normally expect too much variation, but obviously just something to consider if you are using modules for different styles of emails. There is potential for some of the formatting to shift when you use them. So I think they're great, and the efficiencies that you can gain when you have a really good module library are quite significant, because effectively we know that people spend the majority of their time in eShot in the editor. Okay, so using these features effectively are one of the ways in which we can speed up production of an email design, and indeed we can again encourage consistency. Quite often it's like, oh, can you just mention that post in this email again? Yes. What did we say about it last week? I kind of remember. Let's write a new headline. Let's write some new text, a new call to action. It's already stored in the module library. It's a 1-second job to drag and drop it into your email design. So that's one of the use cases for modules, a content library. All the pieces of content, help articles, or just important things. If you are an administrator for a larger eShot account where you have lots of users creating designs, there might be some strategically important messages that you want to get in as many emails as possible, and therefore that's where again the content library of important messages, not necessarily just evergreen messages, you can then highlight to your users, hey, when you're creating your email newsletters this week, please try and ensure that you mention this really important thing. There's a module that you can just drag in to easily add it to your design. However, when we look at the other use case for modules, I mean, there are many use cases for modules, but I picked on two in particular. We can also use modules to build an element library. Now, what do I mean by element library? Well, these are some examples of the sorts of elements that I like to have in emails and email designs that we can use the modules feature for. Single question surveys, preference updates, and promotions. Okay, and we'll look at each one of these individually now, starting with single question surveys, which is probably the most complex, but equally I think is probably the most valuable of these different use cases. So here are some examples of single question survey elements inside an eShot email. We've got a simple binary choice, yes and no. We've got a sliding scale with color. We've got a rating scale with stars. And indeed, we've got a sentiment measure from strongly disagree to strongly agree. Okay, so those are all just some examples of single question survey templates. And indeed, if you look in the template library in eShot, you will find some single question survey templates. But what I've got here is I've got the specific element of the single question survey that we can save as a module and then use in multiple emails. So for example, if your emails are service oriented, then obviously it's a good shout to check with customers how happy or otherwise they are with your service on a fairly regular basis. And again, with that principle of evergreen content, these are the sorts of things which you can just periodically make sure you put in lots and lots of emails to make sure you're always kind of getting answers. The other reason I particularly like single question surveys is no one fills in big ones anymore, and we seem to have an absolute nightmare trying to get sufficient volumes of people to fill in lengthy surveys, whereas actually we see pretty strong results from small surveys because that kind of simple question is something which people are much more inclined to spend time on. And sorry, I got another question there I just seen pop up. Sorry, what is the definition of evergreen? So very simply, I distinguish content between topical content and evergreen content. Okay, so for example, a topical piece of content might be the fact that this webinar is happening today because it's a fixed moment in time, or a news story. So therefore, it has a limited shelf life, and therefore it might not be appropriate as a module because you're not going to have much reuse value in it. You build it into your email, you send your email out, and it will never happen again. Whereas evergreen content, something like a help article about how to build modules, that's something which I'd be more inclined to save into my modules library because it's going to have a reuse value. You know, ultimately what we're doing here is we are recycling bits that we built in previous emails and we're making them available in that modules library. So as I say, building these little kind of survey tools into your emails is an example of something which I would say you want to use time and again, and therefore if you've got them templated in your modules library, again, that's an example of evergreen content. So when we look under the hood of how these work though, because some of you may be sitting there thinking single question surveys, how on earth does that work? Well, what you do, and I've got another question, can you get information such as new contact person from a single survey, or is it yes, no? So the single question surveys really are designed to have simple interactions, yes, no, 1, 2, 3. Although we have the form module within the Smart Editor, that is still an AMP component. So we're still 5 years later waiting for Microsoft to support it. So it's still, unfortunately, people actually entering data into an email is still something we can do, but it's a limited support. What we will do later on in the session is we'll look at Preference Center, which is going to suit your needs more, Gareth. So when we look at a single question survey in terms of these examples that we've got here, yes or no, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I strongly agree, or I strongly disagree, or I strongly agree, there's a little bit more under the hood. Okay, so if I select the really happy one there, you'll see that the team have actually linked it up to a landing page and indeed the text as well. Okay, so obviously we want to make sure things are accessible, or if images are blocked, someone can still interact with this element. And as you can see, the team have also built a couple of landing pages with those messages, you know, so that when they click on something, what we want to do with that single question survey is track the response to it. And therefore, to track the response to it, we need to send them somewhere when they click. Okay. The value of that then, when we look at it from a results perspective, is you then get analytics on who clicked on, well, not just who, but how many people clicked on each link. So you see there in this example of a campaign that's been sent with that sentiment module, I've got, you know, a rating between 1 and 5, and I can drill down into who clicked 1, and I can go and kill him later. So Ian, if you're watching, look out, I'm coming for you. You know, it's very much a case of we can build that module, stick it in our library, and then periodically, whatever the question is, you know, how do you rate this email? How do you rate our service? How are you feeling today on a scale of 1 to whatever? We can build that as a module, use it in as many emails as we like, but then we get those analytics off the back of people interacting with those elements. And as I say, seen a lot of cases where, you know, we've had quite strong responses when customers have used those kind of single question elements. And as I say, it can be as simple as a yes or no, or a sliding scale, or whatever suits the specific use case. The other thing, which is really, really useful then when if you do things like this, and again, I'm coming a little bit off piece here, this isn't strictly to do with the modules. Hopefully all of you know about, because you obviously, by being on a module mastery demo, you are already eShop masters, you know about the click overlay report, one of our most popular pieces of the analytics tool. Did you know though, you can now get a link to the click overlay that you can share with others? So it's not just something that you can get at inside the analytics, you can actually share that link with colleagues so they can see how an email performed. And as you can see there in this particular example, we then get that very visual representation of that scale from 1 to 5, and we can see how many people clicked on each one. So that's where there's real power in bringing these things together. We're using different elements of eShot here. We've got the module for the survey itself. We've got the landing pages to then be able to obviously track the response. And then we've got the analytics tools to bring that all together and start to get a sense of how people are interacting with our, with the mini surveys that we're putting in there. So I've got a question there from where does the click rating take you? It takes you to wherever you specify, Chris. So as you may remember, if I jump back in the link settings here, you'll see I'm driving them to a landing page. Okay, so hopefully you're all familiar with the eShot landing pages function. We can build really quick and easy little landing pages with just simple messages like this. So as I say, these are the sorts of building blocks. This is why it comes into its own with modules. You can build those generic pages, you can build the module, you save the module, you put it in all your emails, and then you get campaign level analytics on each one. But you can drive them anywhere. You know, you could use a simple survey like the yes, no, and then actually when someone clicks on it, you could drive them to the full survey, for example, if you do have something where you want to analyze in a lot more detail. So let me just get back to where I was in my slides, which is yes, so single question surveys I'm a big fan of, and if anyone would like to, as a thank you for actually turning up for the session today, only available to those who are here in live. If you want to, just put I want a single question survey module in the chat, and what I'll do is I'll hand that over to the support team afterwards, and they will get in touch and help you build one in your account. And Harry's slightly terrified now because he's going to be doing all that, and I forgot to tell him about that before the session. Sorry, Harry, but yeah, come on, everyone ask one, everyone. Right, so moving swiftly on then, single question surveys I'm a really big fan of, and as I say, having a few of those, a few templated ones in your modules library, they're the sort of thing which take a little bit of time to just set up to begin with, but once you've got one, they're really, really useful. Next, let's look at preferences. Okay, for most of you who've been on a webinar before, then you will probably have heard me talk about the importance of engagement, the importance of keeping your contact data up to date, and indeed periodically ensuring that you are contacting your you contact your database and speak and ensure that they're receiving the right information from you, and indeed that you hold the right information about them. Okay, there's no service like self-service, one of my absolute cliches, but it's so true. Okay, however, what we know with preference centers, obviously their most common use case is for people to actually unsubscribe, but people do change what they're interested in, and indeed they do change who they are as well. So just yesterday, someone who contacted me, they've got married and they've changed their surname, and indeed they've changed their email address, and they need to update that, and that's a really easy thing to do in a preference center. So being able to expose the data that we hold about a customer or a subscriber and let them change it and update it is really, really good. But it's something which it's not like everyone wakes up in the morning and go, I must update my preferences for that newsletter I received today. So it's one of those things we have to nag about. Okay, we have to kind of keep on plugging away at the database over time to try and ensure they update their preferences. And that's why, for me, a really good shout as an example of a module, if we look at another example here, is yes, okay, we've got the manage profile link in the footer where it always is, but what I've got in my modules library there is a little update your preferences message. Okay, now that's a pretty straight-laced one. You might have something a little bit more creative. Importantly, I always forget that URL. It's got, oh, sorry, too quick. I don't like live demos of eShot, so I recorded most of the UI bits today, but it's important to point out, obviously, when you're driving someone to a preference center, it's important that you use the edit profile URL. I always forget that dynamic link, and therefore having it saved in a module, again, just is a really convenient way. So again, it's the sort of thing where the update preferences module is the sort of thing periodically we put it into all emails. Yes, of course, the unsubscriber is going to be hidden down in the footer, but we might have something else as well. As you can see, though, from that modules library, sorry, Slides have gone a bit funny. Let me rewind. Go back to where I was. We can have lots of different, again, evergreen kind of template bits. So as I say, if it's not the content that stays the same, maybe it's the structure that stays the same. So obviously, if you are using eShop to tell customers about, service aspects, then having a kind of notification template where obviously the content here is going to change. It's not always going to be on the Thursday, the 18th of June, but just the structure, the date, the time, the short description, the button, etc., etc. The learn more button, goes to your standard kind of status page. Those sorts of things, again, as a set of elements, you just have them in your modules library whenever you need to create the next newsletter. We can just mention in that newsletter the fact that there's going to be some maintenance and things like that. Okay, so again, it's this kind of idea of having a set of modules which help you with the housekeeping. I use the preference center as an example because that's such an important one. We almost universally, we should continually be nagging people to ensure that their data is up to date because they're just not going to do it unless pushed. But as I say, there are again many use cases for those kind of structural modules within your account where you just have those little elements that you can draw upon regularly when you need them. Okay. The nice thing about modules is you can save pretty much any aspect of your email as a module. So if you wanted to take your standard footer, because I don't know, one of your colleagues just keeps messing around with it, save your footer as a module. And then whenever it goes wrong in an email design, it's a 2-second job to restore it to its former glory. So lots and lots of use cases. And as I say, I just wanted to highlight a few of the kind of more useful ones in this session today. Last but not least, promotions. As you may know, for those of you on the session today who are one of our public sector customers, which I think based on what I saw from the registration is the majority of you, we do have the email library and we do regularly publish national campaign email templates. So you've got, if you like, whole emails available to you to use to raise awareness within your audiences of important national campaigns. But we can take those national campaign emails and we can adapt them to modules as well. So you see here in my little example, I've got a few ones that are popular at the moment. The Big Help Out, which is coming up at the beginning of June. Help for Households has been something which certainly a lot of our council customers have almost continuously used for the last couple of years. And although I talked about topical content earlier on, versus evergreen, the Electoral Commission one isn't necessarily evergreen. It does have a kind of shelf life. But equally, it's really important. And, again, these are the sorts of messages that we've seen used in so many emails that have gone out over the last few months. Chances are we'll have a break over the summer and then we'll be doing it all again in the autumn. So, again, having these kind of little sections of content, you can build adverts for yourselves. You can build adverts based on national campaigns. And indeed, we do have customers carrying third-party advertising within their eShop accounts as well. So if you're interested to understand how you can potentially turn your email newsletters into a revenue generation stream, then please get in contact with me afterwards because anything's possible. So, promotions, again, just having these sections of emails in this library for you to draw upon whenever you need, really, really useful. We've gone through quite a wide gamut of use cases in this short time today. We've got that kind of, I've got my library of content, but also the kind of component libraries, the single question surveys, the preference centers, the kind of blocks of content that are just useful to you time and again. Whatever it is, really, modules is quite flexible and malleable, and I'm sure you can probably think of your own use cases for them within the platform. So this is where it gets fun. I like to live dangerously, and it's really, really difficult to record a bit of eShot when you're doing some of the more complex things within the platform. So what we're going to do now is we're going to flip to the actual eShot UI, and I'm going to try to show you how to build a module. So bear with me a second. We will hop over to eShot. And I will go into my demo account, which is where some of those funky ones that we were looking at just now are lurking. And I will edit this design. as you can see here, this is the email that we were looking at in the recorded video, and there indeed is that Electoral Commission one. So I'm just going to get rid of that one for now. As you can see here, there's an event set up there, and in our modules library here, we have those other examples that we want. So here, I know this is a gov.uk email template rather than an NHS one, but I'm just going to pull this NHS banner out of my library here. And sorry, Zoom was bouncing away for some reason. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to actually update this text. Okay, so this is just a kind of title header, so I'm going to get rid of that. And it's going to, and we'll get rid of that as well. But we'll just say, you know, module mastery. Obviously, I'm not the NHS, but just an example. Remember to ask for the eShop team to help you build a single question survey module, although I think based on the way the chat was pinging away just now, quite a few of you have done that. Okay, so it's just a daft example, but what I want to do here is demonstrate the concept of, you know, little adverts, little sections of the email that you want to use time and again, whatever it is, you can then save it to your modules library. And the way you do that is you go to the Stripe and you get the little menu that pops out the side there. And you're probably all very used to the normal ones, the moving things around, the copying them and the deleting them. But on the Stripe, we get this extra one on the end, which is the module save as module button. Okay, so when I save that as a module, to begin with, eShot is going to recognize that that came from a module in the first place, because I actually used the module to create this text here. Okay, so what I could do is just update that existing module. However, what I really want to do here is save it as a new one, which is where this little arrow here enables me to save it as a new module, and then I've put that one in. Now, what you may have noticed there, as I say, the Perils of Live demo, I was a little bit trigger happy there, so it saved it as the same name. I have the three little dots in the corner of each module in my library, and I can delete them. So if they are no longer any use to you, can get rid of them across the whole platform. That won't delete them from designs where they're already used. It will just convert the content into normal eShop content. But if I edit that one, then obviously I can give it its own name. So, you know, reminder for modules. I can put a description as well. So if it's important, you know, if you are you know, using modules across a big account with lots of users where you might need to provide an explanation to others as to what this module is for, then you can do so. We can obviously choose whether it's synchronized or not. So in this particular example, I'm not going to do that. You know, I'm going to leave it as an unsynchronized module, so people can use, you know, could change things without affecting it elsewhere. Again, that's a choice depending on the use case. But what I'm also going to use is I'm going to create a tag for this here. So I'm just going to call this promotion. I'm just going to tag this as promotion. Okay. So then when I update, that's now saved in my library. And as you can see, there's all those modules that we've been talking about here, but I can then just go and search for the promotion, and it's going to narrow that selection down. And then sure enough, if I delete it from that email, drag it in, and there you go. Okay, so you know, hopefully this isn't something which is particularly difficult for you to get to grips with, because it's largely using the same features that you are used to for building things in eShop more regularly. It's just that extra bit of housekeeping where we go, I've just crafted a beautiful piece of email which I want to use again in next week's email. Obviously I could copy last week's design and change everything else. However, if it's only a relatively modest element of it, I might consider saving it as a module, and then I can easily drop it into next week's email. So from an administration perspective, hopefully they're not too difficult for you to embrace as well. Obviously, once you have a library of modules, you know, informing your users that they're there, encouraging them to use them is a really good shout. But just remember, you know, it's just it's a little bit like a template. You know, when we pick a template and it's got lorem ipsum and things like that, everything's amendable. Same principle with the modules. So hopefully you'll give modules a go, because I think they're really useful, and I'm sure hopefully well, pretty confident most of you will be sitting there thinking, I could use these for this and I could use them for that. And there's, as I say, there's so many different use cases for it. You know, in this particular example here, like I say, I've got a selection of kind of promotional elements. But you know, as I say, even the kind of normal bits of your email, you know, this is a particularly complex footer, for example, you know, just having it saved as a module just in case someone deletes it from a design or kind of you know, messes it up, is a good shout, because then it's a 2-second job to put it back to how it should be. Okay, so many use cases, so many different things you can do with them. All right, the one thing I would say is start as you mean to continue. Okay, so it'd be very easy to just save things as modules and give them vague names and not tag them and things like that. Great to begin with in the infancy of using them, but once you start to use them at scale and once others are helping are working on the modules with you, just try and make sure you do the housekeeping. You know, give your modules meaningful description names, make sure you tag them, and it's going to be a lot easier for you to then find them, and indeed for others to find them once you start using them on a more widespread basis. So that is about it for today from me. My recommendations for you to achieve module mastery would be to think through the use cases first, build a library, and most of you will hopefully have a test sub account. So that's the sort of thing which you could just build a few sample modules in your test account to begin with. Make sure you're happy with the principles of how they would work, and then you can deploy them more generally throughout your eShot solution. Please remember to use the tagging and categorization, and indeed using the synchronized modules is great, but you just have to be a little bit more careful when you're using the synchronization in terms of, you know, is it going to change it in places where I don't want it to? Last but not least, think about combining it with other features. As we saw with the example of the preference center, we're combining the module with, you know, getting people to update their preferences, with the single question surveys. We're combining it with things like the landing pages and the analytics. And again, you know, when you think through these use cases and kind of, you know, the modules is an element of, you know, becoming highly effective at using eShot for some really clever things. So that's about it for time for today. I've actually finished early for once, which is for those of you who know me on webinars, rare. But what that does mean is we've got some time for Q&A. What we can do is, if you do have questions about what we've gone through, then I can unmute you and we can talk it through in a little bit more detail. However, if you're absolutely happy and you want to run off and start using it straight away, then by all means, thank you very much for joining us today. But if you do want to stick around, then by all means, we can take a few specific questions, and indeed I can show you a little bit more about modules. But thank you so much for watching, and hopefully see you on another webinar soon, which I believe, Harry, correct me if I'm wrong, we're doing a webinar on the accessibility features within eShot in about a month or so. So again, you know, kind of, not that I want to kind of sell the next one to you already, but you may or may not have seen that we've recently updated the accessibility tools within eShot as well, and we'll be doing a webinar on that in a few weeks' time. So thank you for joining me, for those that have to escape, and for those who want to stick around, let's look at some questions.